You were not born to blend in. You were not placed on this earth to disappear into the noise of ordinary living, to shrink yourself down until you fit inside a world that was never designed to hold everything you carry. Before you opened your eyes for the first time, before your first breath filled your lungs, before anyone on this earth had a name for you, heaven already knew yours. And that is not a poetic sentiment. That is not a motivational phrase borrowed from a book someone wrote to sell hope in paperback. That is the architecture of your existence. You were chosen before the foundations of this world were laid. And everything that has happened in your life, every turn, every closed door, every season of confusion, and every moment of inexplicable peace has been moving you toward the fullness of what you were created to be. There is something happening right now as you receive these words. Heaven has not stumbled upon you by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. The feed did not serve you this message because of some random sequence of digital events. You are here because something in the realm of the spirit recognized that this was the moment you needed to hear what has already been written about you in eternity. You are here because there is a calling on your life so significant, so disruptive to the plans of darkness, that the enemy has spent years trying to convince you that you are ordinary, that you are forgotten, that you are too broken to be used, that you have missed your window, that the best moments of your story have already passed. But I need you to understand something with every fiber of your being right now. That voice has been lying to you. The chosen ones are not always the ones standing in the spotlight. They are not always the ones with the loudest voices or the most visible platforms. Some of the most chosen people on this earth are sitting in quiet rooms right now, wondering if anyone sees them, wondering if their prayers are reaching anywhere beyond the ceiling, wondering if the weight they carry every single day is going to crush them before their purpose ever gets a chance to breathe. And if that is you, if you are that person sitting in that quiet room with that heavy question pressing down on your chest, then I need you to hear this clearly. God sees you. Not in the general, theological, everyone is seen by God kind of way. I mean, God sees the specific version of you that exists right now, in this moment, with this particular brand of exhaustion and this specific shade of hope that you are somehow holding on to despite everything that has tried to take it from you. You are not like the rest. That is not arrogance. That is alignment. There is a difference between pride and identity, and what God placed inside of you was never meant to be hidden under layers of self-doubt and cultural pressure and the opinions of people who could never see what heaven put inside you. You were designed to carry something that most people around you cannot even perceive. And that is why so much of your life has felt like you were moving through the world slightly out of phase with everyone else, like you could see things others could not see, feel things others seemed immune to, sense shifts in the spiritual atmosphere before anyone else registered that anything had changed. That is not strangeness. That is sensitivity. That is the prophetic wiring of a chosen one, activated and alive in you, whether you recognized it or not. Your presence carries weight. When you walk into a room, something shifts, not because of your credentials or your achievements or your social standing, but because of what lives inside you. The light that God placed within you does not ask permission to shine. It simply shines, and the darkness that has been at war with you all your life is not threatened by your failures. It is threatened by that light. It has always been threatened by that light. Every attack that has come against you, every season of loss, every relationship that fell apart, every dream that seemed to die before it could grow, every time you were overlooked or underestimated or dismissed, None of that was punishment. None of that was proof that you were wrong about the calling you sensed on your life. It was evidence, it was confirmation. Because darkness does not waste energy attacking people who pose no threat. You have carried more than most. You have walked through things that would have ended other people, and yet here you are, breathing, still seeking, still reaching towards something greater than what this world has shown you so far. That is not stubbornness. That is the grace of God sustaining a vessel that heaven refuses to abandon. You are still here because your assignment is not finished. You are still here because the chapter that defines your legacy has not yet been written. You are still here because the God who chose you before you were born has not changed his mind about you. Not once, not in your worst moment, not in your deepest failure, not in the silence that felt like rejection but was actually preparation. Right now, in this moment, heaven is pressing pause on the noise around you. Every distraction, every competing voice, every fear that has been running on a loop in the back of your mind, heaven is asking all of it to be still so that you can receive what is being spoken directly to you. This message was not assembled by chance. These words were not gathered together randomly. Something divine is moving through this moment, and if you can feel it even slightly, if there is even a small warmth beginning to rise in your chest as you listen, that is not imagination. That is recognition. That is the spirit within you, recognizing the voice of the one who made you and marked you and has never, not for a single second, let you go. You were never meant to blend in. You were never meant to make yourself smaller, to make other people more comfortable. You were never meant to trade the magnitude of your calling for the comfort of belonging to a crowd that was never walking in your direction anyway. The chosen ones have always been set apart, and set apart does not mean isolated. Set apart means consecrated. Set apart means designated. Set apart means there is a specific work, a specific impact, a specific imprint that only you can leave on this generation. And the world is waiting for you to step into the fullness of it. If you are receiving this right now, and something inside you is stirring, something deep and wordless that preceded your ability to explain it, then I want you to do something. Type 222 in the comments right now, not as a superstition, not as a ritual, but as a declaration. As a moment where you plant a flag in the ground of this day and say to heaven and to yourself that you are awake, that you are aware, that you receive the truth of who you are, and that you are ready to walk in the fullness of the calling that was written over your life before you ever arrived in this world. 222. Let it be your yes. Let it be your moment of alignment with everything God has already declared about you. Because the journey that begins in this message is not just information. It is activation. And what is about to unfold across the next several minutes of your life has the potential to change the way you see yourself, the way you carry your calling, and the way you move through the world from this day forward. You were not born to blend in. You were born to burn, and the fire that heaven placed inside you has not gone out. It has been waiting, and today it begins to rise. And 222 is not just a number you type into a comment box. It is a marker. It is the moment in time where you drew a line in the sand and said that everything before this moment was preparation, and everything after this moment is movement. It is the timestamp of your awakening. The record of the day you stopped consuming the story of your calling from a distance and stepped into it with both feet and an open heart and a willingness to be changed by what you received. There are chosen ones reading this comment section right now who are going to see your 222, and something is going to shift in them. Not because of the number itself, but because of what it represents. Because when a chosen one, who has been sitting in silence and isolation, sees evidence that someone else received the same truth they just received, and said yes to it publicly, and without apology, something breaks open. The loneliness cracks. The lie that says you are the only one who carries this, the only one who sees this, the only one who has endured this particular brand of being set apart. That lie loses its grip. And in the space where the lie was, something true begins to grow. Community, recognition, the bone-deep relief of knowing that you are not alone in the room. So type 222. Do it for yourself. Do it as your declaration, but also do it for the one who is scrolling through the comments right now, looking for proof that what they just heard is real, and that other people felt it too. Your yes is not only yours. In the kingdom of God, a chosen one's declaration of alignment always carries a ripple that reaches further than the moment it was spoken into. Let yours travel. Let it find the ones it was meant to find. Heaven is watching, and heaven is pleased. There is something you need to understand about the life of a chosen one, and it is this. The path toward your destiny will almost never look the way you imagined it would. It will not be a straight road lit with signs that confirm you are moving in the right direction. It will not be a comfortable progression from one open door to the next. For most chosen ones, the road to purpose runs directly through pain. It runs through seasons that make no sense from the outside. It runs through moments so dark and so disorienting that every logical part of your mind will tell you that the dream you once carried was nothing more than wishful thinking. But the dream was real. It was real when it came to you. It was real when it burned inside your chest like something too large to contain, and it is still real now, no matter what has happened since the day it was first placed inside you. Joseph knew what it felt like to carry a dream that others could not see. He was the 11th of 12 sons, born to a father who loved him deeply, and to brothers who watched that love with growing bitterness. He was young, full of vision, and unguarded in the way that only the truly called can afford to be before the world teaches them to protect what is sacred. He dreamed of sheaves of wheat bowing down before his sheaf. He dreamed of the sun and the moon and 11 stars making obeisance to him. And in the innocence of his calling, he shared those dreams openly, not to boast, but because something in him could not contain the magnitude of what heaven had shown him. He had not yet learned that not everyone who sits at your table is equipped to carry the weight of your destiny. He had not yet learned that the people closest to you are sometimes the ones least prepared to celebrate what God has placed inside you. His brothers heard the dreams and hated him for them. Not because the dreams were arrogant, but because something in those dreams rang true, and truth has a way of agitating the parts of people that have not yet surrendered to their own calling. They saw in Joseph what they feared they would never have in themselves. And rather than let that recognition lead them to their own growth, they let it harden into something darker. They plotted against him. They stripped him of the coat his father had given him, that coat of many colors that was a visible declaration of his father's love and his own distinction. And then they threw him into a pit. Think about what that moment felt like. One moment, Joseph was walking toward his brothers, sent by his father, full of purpose and family loyalty, and the uncomplicated belief that love is met with love. And the next moment the coat was gone, and the ground had fallen away. And he was in a hole in the earth, looking up at the sky through a narrow opening, listening to his own brothers sit down to eat a meal, while he was still calling out from below. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, if you have ever been stripped of something that represented your identity and your belonging. If you have ever found yourself in a pit that someone else put you in, then you already know something about Joseph that no theology textbook can fully explain. You know what it feels like when the people who should have been your covering become the instrument of your undoing. But here is what the pit could not touch. The dream was still inside him. They could take the coat. They could remove the symbol. They could sell him to a passing caravan of Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver and watch him disappear into the distance toward Egypt without a single moment of visible remorse. But they could not reach inside him and extract what God had deposited there. The dream traveled with Joseph into slavery. The anointing did not stay behind in the pit. Calling did not expire the moment the transaction was complete and the silver changed hands. Because what heaven places inside a chosen one is not contingent on the cooperation of the people around them. It is not dependent on whether your family celebrates you. It is not suspended because someone who should have loved you chose betrayal instead. And this is the word that is moving through this message for you right now. Whatever pit you have been placed in, whether it was placed there by a family member or a friend or a colleague or a system or a season of life that seemed to collapse without warning, you need to know that what God put inside you did not stay at the edge of that pit when you fell in. It came down with you. It is in the pit with you right now, if that is where you find yourself. And the same God who knew Joseph by name before he was born, the same God who authored those dreams before Joseph ever closed his eyes to sleep. That same God has not lost track of you in your descent. He is in the pit with you, and he is already planning the road out. The book of Genesis chapter 37 verse 19 and 20 records the moment the brothers saw Joseph coming and said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits." They called him a dreamer as an insult. They used the word as a weapon, as a way of diminishing the very thing that made him exceptional. But what they meant as a label of contempt, heaven wore as a badge of honor. Because God does not choose the dreamless. God chooses the ones who can see beyond the present moment into the reality that has not yet materialized. God chooses the ones who carry vision that makes others uncomfortable. God chooses the ones whose dreams are large enough to agitate the settled, to disturb the complacent, to stir up the waters in rooms that had grown stagnant. You are a dreamer. And if that word has ever been used against you, if someone has ever said it with a curl of dismissal in their voice, as though dreaming were a character flaw rather than a divine gift, then I need you to reclaim it right now. The ability to see what does not yet exist is not a weakness. It is a weapon. It is the weapon God placed inside you, so that you could partner with him in bringing things from the unseen realm into the visible world. Joseph dreamed before the famine came. Joseph dreamed before the palace existed in his future. Joseph dreamed before a single one of the circumstances that would eventually fulfill those dreams had taken their shape. And the dreaming was not separate from the destiny. The dreaming was the beginning of it. Your pit is not your ending. The betrayal that has left you breathless, the stripping away of things that once defined you, the disorientation of finding yourself in a place you never chose and cannot immediately escape. None of it has the final word over your life. Joseph went into the pit as a dreamer and came out as a slave, but he arrived in Egypt as a man who still carried the anointing of heaven on his life. The external circumstances had changed dramatically. The internal deposit remained untouched, and that is what the enemy never understands about the chosen ones. You can change their address, you can change their title, you can change their comfort level and their social standing and the number of people who are cheering for them. but you cannot change what God placed in them before they were born. That is sealed. That is settled. That is beyond the reach of any betrayal, any pit, any caravan heading in the wrong direction. The wrong direction, as it turns out, was the right direction all along. Egypt was not the end of Joseph's story. Egypt was the beginning of it. And wherever you are right now, whatever direction your life appears to be moving, you are not outside the reach of the God who turns pits into platforms and betrayal into the very road that leads to your throne. You survived the pit. But surviving the pit does not mean the testing is over. For the chosen one, there is often a second layer of fire that comes after the first, and it arrives not in the form of open enemies, but in the form of quiet, invisible injustice. It arrives in the form of doing everything right and still being punished. It arrives in the form of serving faithfully, building something meaningful, earning trust through consistent excellence, and then watching it all collapse because of a lie told by someone you never wronged. If you have ever been in that place, if you have ever stood accused of something you did not do, if you have ever watched your reputation be dismantled by the words of someone who had no right to speak against you, then what happened to Joseph in Egypt is not ancient history. It is your story, and heaven is using it right now to tell you something that you need to hear all the way down to the marrow of your bones. Joseph arrived in Egypt with nothing, no coat, no family, no freedom. He was a commodity in a transaction, a young man from a foreign land with no advocates and no legal standing, and no way to explain to anyone around him that he was carrying a dream from God that had not yet found its moment to breathe. He was purchased by a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, a man of significant power and influence in the most powerful nation on earth at that time. And Joseph, being who he was, being thus as person that anointing produces when it is genuine and not performative, did not shrink in that environment. He did not grow bitter in that environment. He did not allow the injustice of his circumstances to poison the quality of his character. He worked. He served. He brought excellence to every task placed before him. And the scripture records something that is almost impossible to overstate in its significance. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Potiphar saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. That is the signature of a chosen one. It is not that everything goes smoothly. It is not that the path is obstacle-free. It is that even in the most inhospitable environment, even in circumstances that were never meant to contain someone of your caliber, something about the way you operate causes the people around you to notice that there is a different quality to your work, a different weight to your presence, a different outcome attached to your efforts. Potiphar noticed. He elevated Joseph. He gave him authority over his entire household. He trusted him with everything he owned except the food he ate. And Joseph honored that trust completely. He was not building a strategy for his own advancement. He was simply being faithful to the calling that was inside him. And faithfulness, when it is genuine, always creates a visible trail. But then came the accusation. Potiphar's wife wanted Joseph, and Joseph refused her. Not once, repeatedly. Every day she pressed, and every day Joseph held the line, not because he was rigidly following a rule, but because he understood something that many people in his position would have rationalized away. He said to her, "My master has trusted me with everything in this house. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He was not just protecting his integrity, he was protecting his assignment. He understood, even in the depths of a season that made no outward sense, that there was a God watching over the details of his life. and that the details of his character were not separate from the details of his destiny. The two were woven together inextricably. What you do in private when no one is watching is the very fabric from which your public assignment will eventually be cut. She grabbed his garment. He ran. She held the garment in her hand and used it as evidence of a lie. The same hands that tried to pull him into compromise became the hands that placed him in chains. He did everything right. He held every boundary. He protected every trust. And he still ended up in prison. And if you have ever been in that particular kind of darkness, the darkness of the prison that forms not around your failures, but around your faithfulness, then you already know that this is one of the most disorienting forms of suffering a human being can endure. Because at least when you suffer as a consequence of your own choices, there is a logic to it that your mind can eventually make peace with. But when you suffer because chose rightly, when the punishment comes not in spite of your integrity, but almost because of it, that is when the questions get the loudest and the silence of heaven feels the most absolute. Where are you, God? Did you see what just happened? I did what you asked me to do. I held the line when it would have been so much easier to cross it. I protected what was not mine to compromise, and this is where I end up, in a prison, with a false charge against my name, with no witness to speak on my behalf, with nothing but the memory of doing right in a moment when doing wrong would have been so much more convenient. That question is not faithlessness. That question is human, and heaven does not flinch at the sound of it. The God who called you is not fragile. He is not threatened by your grief or your confusion or your demand to understand why the road that was supposed to lead somewhere good seems to have deposited you somewhere that looks and feels like the end. He has heard that question before. He heard it in the darkness of an Egyptian prison from a young man who had done nothing wrong and was serving time for it anyway. And he answered it not with an explanation, but with a presence. The scripture does not record that God explained the injustice to Joseph. It records that the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The book of Genesis chapter 39 verse 21 says, "The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Not an explanation, a presence. Not a logical framework for the suffering. A love that refused to leave even when the circumstances screamed that love had exited the building. That is the God you are dealing with. That is the God who called you and marked you and has not for a single moment, removed his hand from your life even when every external sign seemed to suggest otherwise. The unjust accusation against you does not define you. The false narrative that someone else wrote about you does not have the final word. The prison that your faithfulness built around you is not your permanent address. What the enemy meant to use as your burial ground, God is already redesigning as your launching pad. Joseph did not leave Egypt to escape his destiny. He stayed in Egypt and watched his destiny come looking for him inside the very prison that was supposed to silence him forever. The attack did not cancel the anointing. The lie did not erase the dream. The chains did not reach deep enough to bind what God had placed in the spirit of a chosen one before the world had ever heard his name. You are still carrying what God put inside you. The accusation did not extract it. The injustice did not dissolve it. The silence of a season that has felt unbearably long has not caused it to expire. It is still in you, burning quietly, waiting for the moment that heaven has already circled on a calendar that operates outside the limits of human time. And that moment is closer than the darkness of your current season is telling you. The enemy always overplays his hand with chosen ones. He spends so much effort trying to bury you that he forgets the seed that is buried in the right soil. Not die, it grows. And what is about to grow from the ground of everything you have endured is going to be so far beyond what you lost that the memory of the prison will eventually become the very testimony that sets someone else free. Hold on, the dream is still alive, the anointing is still intact, and the God who was with Joseph in the pit, in the slave quarters, and in the prison cell is the same God who is with you right now, in whatever confined and unjust space you currently occupy. He has not forgotten your name. He has not misplaced your file. He has not moved on to someone more convenient. He is here. He was always here, and he is not finished with you yet. And yet, even as that truth settles into you, even as the reality of God's unbroken presence begins to quiet the loudest of your fears, there is something else that chosen ones must understand about the way they were built. Because the calling on your life is not only spiritual in its nature, it is also neurological. It is also physiological. It is written not only in the scrolls of heaven, but in the very architecture of the brain that God designed and placed inside your skull before you took your first breath. And this is where something extraordinary begins to surface. Something that the scientific community has been quietly uncovering for decades, while the rest of the world was too distracted to notice. Chosen ones carry a specific frequency. Researchers who have spent their careers studying the electrical activity of the human brain have begun to document something that theologians have known in a different language for centuries. There is a state of mind, a measurable, reproducible, scientifically observable state of mind that the most creative, the most intuitive, the most visionary human beings on earth tend to operate from. And that state is not random. It is not the exclusive property of a genetic elite. It is a frequency, and it has a name. Researchers call it gamma, and beneath it, building toward it, is the frequency known as theta. Theta waves, measured between 4 and 8 cycles per second, are the brain waves most associated with deep creativity, rapid learning, intuition, and the kind of insight that arrives not through grinding effort, but through a quality of inner receptivity that most adults have slowly, unknowingly lost over the years. Children operate in theta almost continuously. It is why they learn languages effortlessly and absorb the world around them with a kind of open, unguarded wonder that gradually closes as the demands of adult life layer over it. And gamma, the higher frequency, is what researchers describe as the brainwave of breakthrough. It is the state of the eureka moment, the flash of clarity, the sudden integration of complex information into a single luminous insight. It is the frequency of the mind operating at its absolute highest capacity. And for most people, access to both of these states becomes increasingly rare with age, with stress, with the accumulated weight of a life that has asked more of them than it has given back. A neuroscientist named Dr. James Rivers, trained at MIT with over 30 years of research into the relationship between brain frequencies and human performance, began asking a question that changed the direction of his work entirely. He asked whether it was possible to guide the brain back into these elevated states deliberately, safely, and without requiring years of meditation practice or spellish training. His research, which drew on studies connected to NASA's exploration of peak cognitive performance, led him to a discovery that is now being called one of the most significant breakthroughs in applied neuroscience. He found that the brain has a remarkable capacity to synchronize its own electrical activity with external sound frequencies, a phenomenon known as brainwave entrainment. And when the right frequencies are delivered through precisely calibrated audio, the brain does not resist. It follows, it entrains. It begins to produce the very waves that correspond to creativity, clarity, focus, and the kind of elevated awareness that chosen ones have always carried as a birthright. The result of that research is a 7-minute audio experience called the Genius Wave. Not 7 hours. Not a course that takes months to complete. 7 minutes of precisely engineered sound designed to guide your brain into theta and gamma states with a consistency and depth that most people never access on their own. You do not need to be a meditator. You do not need any prior experience with breathwork or binaural audio or any particular spiritual practice. You simply listen, and as you listen, something in your brain begins to shift. The hippocampus, the region most associated with memory and learning, becomes more active. The neural pathways associated with creative problem solving begin to open. The fog that has settled over your thinking, the fog that stress and grief and prolonged difficulty tend to produce, begins to lift. And what remains underneath it is something that was always there, waiting. The mind of a chosen one, operating at the frequency it was always designed to reach. As a woman named Sandra, a single mother who had been working 2 jobs for 3 years while trying to finish an online certification that she hoped would change her financial situation, began using the Genius Wave during her lunch breaks. She had 17 minutes between shifts, and she used 7 of them for the audio. Within the first 2 weeks, she told Dr. Rivers directly that something had changed in the way her mind was processing the coursework she had been struggling with for months. Not only was she retaining information more easily, but she was finding connections between concepts that had previously seemed unrelated, and her problem solving at work had noticeably improved to the point where her supervisor commented on it without knowing anything had changed. She passed her certification on the next attempt after failing it twice. That is not a miracle. That is a brain operating at the frequency it was built to reach. A man named Marcus, a 43-year-old contractor who had been dealing with mental fog and creative block for the better part of 2 years, following a period of significant personal loss, started using the Genius Wave each morning before beginning his workday. Within a month, he had redesigned a workflow in his business that reduced his team's project completion time by nearly 30%. He described the experience as feeling like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed, shut for too long. Fresh air, he said, that is what it felt like. Fresh air in a place that had forgotten what fresh air was. Now I know some of you are thinking that $39 is not nothing. And I want to acknowledge that honestly, because you deserve that acknowledgement. $39 is a real amount of money, especially if this season of your life has been financially tight, especially if you have been burned before by promises that did not deliver. That feeling is valid, that caution is reasonable, and I am not asking you to ignore it. I am asking you to weigh it. Weigh it against the cost of another year of mental fog. Weigh it against the cost of another season of operating below the frequency you were designed to reach. Weigh it against the cost of a chosen one who has the dream inside them but cannot access the mental clarity to bring it into form. The Genius Wave is normally priced at $49. Through the link in the pinned comment, it is available today for just $39. And it comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. Not 30 days, 90 days. 3 full months to use it, experience it, and decide for yourself whether what it does in your mind is worth the investment. If it is not, you get every dollar back. No argument, no complicated process. The risk is not on you, it is on the research, and the research is confident. One final thing. There are imitations circulating online. There are products using similar language that are not the original work of Dr. James Rivers and do not contain the precise frequency calibration that makes the genuine audio effective. Please purchase only through the single link in the pinned comment and the description below. That is the only source where you are guaranteed to receive the original, correctly calibrated audio that the research was built on. This offer, at this price, is not permanent. The $39 access is available for a limited time and to a limited number of people before the price returns to its standard rate. If something in you is stirring as you hear this, do not set it aside for later. Later has a way of becoming never, and you have waited long enough already. You have already survived the pit. You have already endured the prison. You have already carried the dream through seasons that tried to convince you the dream was dead. And now heaven is placing in your hands a tool that aligns with the very wiring of the mind God gave you. This is not coincidence. This is not the algorithm. This is the moment where the spiritual and the practical meet, where the anointing on your life finds a corresponding instrument in the natural world that was designed to help it flow without obstruction. Joseph did not refuse the tools available to him in Egypt. He used every gift, every skill, every resource that the environment offered, and he let God move through all of it. He did not wait for a burning bush or a parting sea. He worked with what was in his hands, and heaven multiplied it. That is the model for a chosen one. You do not despise the practical, you sanctify it. You bring it into alignment with the calling, and you let God determine what grows from the combination of your obedience and your effort. The genius wave is not a replacement for your faith. It is a companion to it. It is a way of honoring the mind that God built inside you by giving it the conditions it was designed to thrive in. 7 minutes a day. That is all that stands between the version of you that is struggling to access your full capacity and the version of you that begins to operate at the frequency heaven always intended. The link is in the pinned comment. The guarantee is real. The window is open, and the chosen one, who was thrown into a pit and still carried the dream all the way to the palace, is living proof that the right tools in the right hands at the right moment can change everything. There is a kind of silence that follows a season of intensity that is unlike any other silence you will ever encounter. It is not the silence of peace, though it can eventually become that. It is not the silence of emptiness, though it will try to convince you that it is. It is the silence of the interval, the held breath between one movement of the symphony and the next, the stillness that exists, not because the music has ended, but because what is coming next requires a different quality, preparation than what has already been played. And if you are in that silence right now, if the noise of the last battle has faded and you find yourself in a strange, undefined space where nothing seems to be moving and heaven seems to have gone unusually quiet, then what is being spoken to you in this moment is this. The silence is not abandonment. The silence is architecture. God is building something in you that cannot be built in motion. Joseph knew this silence. After he interpreted the dream of the cupbearer in prison, after he told that man with precision and confidence that within 3 days Pharaoh would restore him to his position, after the cupbearer walked out of that prison back into the palace and back into the life that had been waiting for him, Joseph made one request. Remember me when it is well with you. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this place. It was a reasonable request. It was a humble request. It was the request of a man who had served faithfully in every environment he had been placed in, who had used his God-given gift to bless someone who had the power and the proximity to help him, and who simply asked that the favor be returned. and the cupbearer forgot him. The scripture says it with a plainness that is almost brutal in its simplicity. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 full years passed. 730 days of silence. 730 mornings of waking up in a prison that should have been behind him by now. 730 evenings of watching the light change through whatever narrow opening existed in that space, and wondering whether the God who had given him the gift of interpretation had somehow misread the timeline of his own plan. 2 years is not a short silence. 2 years is long enough to make a person question everything. Long enough to make the dream feel like a delusion. Long enough to make faithfulness feel like foolishness. But here is what those 2 years were doing beneath the surface of what Joseph could see. They were completing him. They were not wasting him. They were not punishing him. They were not evidence that God had misplaced his file or grown distracted by the needs of more important people. They were the final stages of a preparation so thorough, so precise, so intentional in its detail, that when the moment of elevation finally came, Joseph would be ready for it in a way that 2 years earlier simply was not. The palace requires a different kind of man than the pit produces. And the prison, as unjust as it was, as unnecessary as it appeared from the outside, was doing a work in Joseph that the palace could not have done in him. The humility it built, the patience it forged, the unshakable quality of trust in God that can only be developed in a season where trust is the only thing you have left. These were not byproducts of the suffering. They were the product. They were the thing being manufactured in the silence. And this speaks directly to where you are, because chosen ones have a particular vulnerability that is worth naming honestly. They carry large dreams. They have seen glimpses of what is coming. They have felt the weight of the calling, and they have said yes to it, sometimes at great personal cost. And they have endured the pit and the prison and the false accusation and the forgotten promise. And they arrive at the silence expecting that surely, now, the breakthrough must be imminent. And when the silence extends, when the breakthrough does not arrive on the schedule that seemed logical after everything they have already survived, something dangerous begins to happen. They begin to fill the silence themselves. They begin to manufacture movement because stillness has started to feel like failure. They begin to push doors that are not yet ready to open because waiting has started to feel indistinguishable from being forgotten. Do not fill this silence with your own noise. Do not mistake the pause for a period. What God is doing in the quiet seasons of a chosen one's life is always larger than what is visible during those seasons. The roots that grow deepest always grow in the dark. The foundation that holds the most weight is always the one that was laid the most carefully, the most slowly, the most without fanfare or visible progress. You cannot rush what God is building in you during the silence without compromising the structural integrity of what He is building you toward. Joseph could not have handled the palace at 20. He needed the pit. He needed Potiphar's house. He needed the prison. He needed the 2 forgotten years. Not because God is cruel, but because the assignment that was waiting for Joseph on the other side of the silence was of a magnitude that required every single one of those experiences to have done their complete work in him before he was handed the authority to carry it. The book of Psalm 105 verse 19 says, "Until the time that his word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested him." Until the time. That phrase is doing so much work in that sentence. It is not saying that the testing was random. It is not saying that Joseph suffered because God was indifferent or absent or unable to intervene. It is saying that there was a time already established, already appointed, already locked into the calendar of heaven, and that until that time arrived, the word of the Lord, the very great dream that started everything, was functioning not as a comfort to be enjoyed, but as a test to be endured. Joseph hold on to the word when the word seemed to be failing him. Could he carry the dream when the dream had no visible form? Could he remain faithful to the call when the call had produced nothing but suffering and silence and the slow grinding weight of a prison that was supposed to be temporary and had started to feel permanent? He could, and he did, and the time came. It always comes for the chosen one who does not let go. The silence does not mean no. It means not yet, and not yet is not the same as never. It is not the same as you were wrong about the dream. It is not the same as God has changed his mind about you. It is the sound of heaven completing what it started, layer by layer, depth by depth, with a care and a precision that your impatience will always underestimate. The silence is not the end of your story. The silence is the last chapter of your preparation, and preparation, when it is finished, does not announce itself. It simply steps aside and lets the moment that was always coming finally arrive. So let the silence do its work. Let the stillness complete what the storms began. Let the waiting season finish building what the trials started. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not being passed over in favor of someone more qualified or more patient or more spiritually together than you are. You are in the final stages of a preparation that heaven has been overseeing with extraordinary care. And the God who sustained Joseph through 730 days of silence after a forgotten promise is the same God who is sustaining you through every quiet, confusing, seemingly unproductive day of the season you are currently in. He has not forgotten your name. He has not misplaced your dream. He has not abandoned the timeline that he set in motion before you were born. He is simply finishing. And when God finishes a thing, what emerges is always worth every single day of the silence that preceded it. What you have been receiving in this space is not content. It is not a production designed to fill a time slot or satisfy an algorithm or generate numbers on a dashboard that someone somewhere is monitoring for performance metrics. What has been moving through this message from the very beginning is something that originates in a place that no camera can capture and no editing software can manufacture. It is the breath of heaven moving through words that were assembled with one purpose and one purpose only: to find you, to reach the specific version of you that exists in this exact moment, in this exact season, carrying this exact weight, holding this exact dream. And if these words have found you, if something in your chest has been responding to what has been spoken over these last several minutes, then what is being asked of you right now is not complicated. It is simply this: do not let what you have received stop with you. Joseph did not carry the gift of interpretation for his own benefit. When he sat in that prison, and the baker and the cupbearer came to him with troubled faces and troubled dreams, he did not keep his gift folded up inside himself, because the environment was not prestigious enough, or the audience was not large enough, or the circumstances were not favorable enough for him to show up fully. He looked at those two men and he said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." He made himself available. He opened what was inside him and let it flow toward the people who were in front of him, regardless of where he was or what his current circumstances looked like, or whether he felt that his situation was stable enough to justify generosity. He gave from what he carried, and that act of giving, that willingness to let the gift move outward instead of hoarding it inward, was part of the chain of events that eventually led to the moment when Pharaoh needed an interpreter, and The cupbearer finally remembered the young man in the prison who had told him exactly what would happen. Your gift was not given to you to be kept. Your story was not given to you to be silenced. Your presence in this space, the fact that you have listened this far, the fact that something in you recognized what was being spoken and leaned toward it rather than away from it, that is itself a sign that you carry something that other people need. And the simplest, most immediate way you can begin to let what you carry move outward is by doing something that costs you nothing but carries more weight than you might realize. If this message has touched something in you, if it has reached a place that needed to be reached, share it. Not because a number needs to go up, not because a channel needs to grow, but because there is someone in your circle, someone in your family, someone among your friends or your acquaintances, or the people who follow you in whatever space you occupy, who is sitting in their own pit right now, who is enduring their own prison, who has been carrying a dream that the silence has been slowly convincing them was never real. And they need to hear what you just heard. They need to receive what you just received. And you have the ability to put it in front of them with a single action. Share this message. Send it to the person whose face appeared in your mind as you were listening. Forward it to the one who texted you last week saying they were not doing well, and you did not quite know what to say back. Post it in the space where you know people are gathered, who are hungry for something real, something that goes deeper than inspiration and touches the actual root of what chosen ones carry and what chosen ones endure. You do not need to add a caption. You do not need to write a theological essay to go along with it. Just send it. Just share it. Let it find the people it was assembled to find. Because every person who receives this message and finds something real in it is a confirmation that what is being built here is not as accidental. It is intentional. It is consecrated. It is part of a larger work that is moving through this generation with a quiet but undeniable momentum. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, if you have been receiving these messages as a guest rather than as someone who has made a conscious decision to stay connected to what is flowing here, then this is the moment to make that decision. Click subscribe, not as a passive administrative action, but as a declaration that you are choosing to remain in the flow of what God is releasing through this space. A declaration that you are not here by accident, and you are not leaving by accident either. You are choosing to stay. You are choosing to keep your ears tuned to the frequency of what heaven is speaking over the chosen ones of this generation. And every time a new message arrives, it will find you already positioned, already present, already leaning in, because you made a decision in this moment to stay connected rather than drift away and wonder later why you stopped receiving what was once feeding you. Like this message, if it has fed you today, not as a courtesy gesture but as an act of agreement, as a way of saying yes to what has been spoken, as a way of adding your voice to the chorus of chosen ones who are awake in this season and who refuse to let the noise of a world that does not understand their calling drown out the voice of the one who placed that calling inside them before the world began. Your like matters, not because of what it does for a number, but because of what it does in you. It is a small act of alignment, a small yes spoken in the direction of truth, and small acts of alignment repeated consistently are how chosen ones build the momentum that eventually carries them from the prison to the palace. There is also a link in the description and in the pinned comment for those who feel led to support what is being built here more directly. This channel exists because people who believed in what was being created here chose to invest in it, not extravagantly, not beyond their means, but faithfully, in the way that chosen ones have always supported the things that are feeding their spirit and sharpening their calling. If that is you, if you feel a genuine pull to contribute to what is growing, here, the link is there. Use it if it resonates. And if it is not the right season for that kind of support, then your presence here, your attention, your prayers, and your willingness to share what you receive are more than enough. Every form of support is seen. Every act of faithfulness to what God is building through this space is recorded in a ledger that operates above the reach of any algorithm. Because what is being built here is not a media channel. It is a gathering place. It is a space where chosen ones who have been wandering in isolation, who have been carrying their dreams in silence, who have been enduring their seasons of pit and prison, and forgotten promise. Without a community of people who understand the specific weight of what they carry, can come and find each other, can come and find language for what they have been experiencing, can come and find confirmation that they are not crazy, that the dream is real, that the calling is legitimate, that the silence is not abandonment, that the God who chose them before the foundation of the world has not changed his mind and has not moved on and has not found someone more convenient to carry what he placed specifically and intentionally inside of them. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. And the community that is gathering around what is being spoken in this space is proof of that. Stay connected. Stay present. Keep coming back. Because what is being released here is not finished. There is more. There is always more when the source is inexhaustible, and the God who has been speaking through this message has an inexhaustible supply of what chosen ones need to hear in order to stand, in order to endure, in order to carry the dream through every pit and every prison and every silence until the morning that heaven has already appointed finally arrives. There is a moment that comes in every chosen one's journey that cannot be manufactured, cannot be rushed, and cannot be fully prepared for even by the most thorough preparation. It is the moment of sudden reversal. It is the moment when everything that was moving against you stops, not gradually, not incrementally, not through a slow accumulation of small improvements that eventually add up to something meaningful, but suddenly, completely, in a single day, in a single conversation, in a single divine appointment that arrives without warning and rearranges everything that had seemed permanently fixed. You have been surviving the pit. You have been enduring the prison. You have been holding the dream through the silence, and then, without any of the fanfare that the magnitude of the moment deserves, heaven moves. And when heaven moves on behalf of a chosen one who has refused to let go, what follows is not a modest improvement in circumstances. What follows is a transformation so complete, so total, so far beyond what the chosen one had dared to hope for in the depths of their most difficult season, that the only adequate response is silence. A silence of a completely different quality than the silence of waiting. The silence of someone standing inside a reality that they always believed in, but never quite allowed themselves to fully picture. Pharaoh had a dream. 2 dreams actually, on the same night, both carrying the same message in different symbolic form. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows. 7 full heads of grain swallowed by 7 thin and scorched heads of grain. And Pharaoh woke up, troubled in a way that the most powerful man in the most powerful nation on earth had perhaps never been troubled before. Because there is a particular quality of disturbance that comes when God uses the dream space to deliver a message that the waking mind is not yet equipped to process. Pharaoh called every magician in Egypt, every wise man in his court, and not one of them could interpret what he had seen. The silence in that throne room The silence of assembled expertise confronting something that exceeded its reach was the silence that preceded Joseph's moment. And then the cupbearer remembered. 2 years late, 730 days after, the moment when a word of remembrance could have changed everything, the cupbearer stood before Pharaoh and said, "I remember my offenses today." And he told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew man in the prison who had interpreted dreams with a precision that had proven exactly accurate. And Pharaoh sent for Joseph. And this is the detail that the scripture includes that I want you to sit with for a moment, because it carries something important for every chosen one who is still in their waiting season. They quickly brought Joseph out of the pit, and he shaved and changed his clothes and came before Pharaoh. Quickly, after years of slowness, after years of forgotten promises and unanswered prayers, and days that blurred into each other with no visible movement toward anything, the word that heaven used to describe the pace of Joseph's release was quickly. That is the nature of divine reversal. The waiting is long. The release is sudden. The preparation takes years. The promotion takes a moment. And no amount of time spent in the prison can tell you accurately how close or how far you are from the morning when quickly becomes the operative word over your life. Because quickly is not on your timeline. It is on heaven's timeline. And heaven's timeline is not calibrated to your comfort or your exhaustion or your assessment of how long is reasonable to wait. It is calibrated to a precision that takes into account every detail of what you need to be, every depth of what you need to carry, every dimension of what you need to have survived in order to be truly ready for the weight of what is coming. Joseph stood before Pharaoh, and he did what he had always done in every environment he had occupied. He brought excellence. He brought the gift fully and without reservation. He did not perform humility. He did not shrink from the magnitude of the moment. He told Pharaoh that the interpretation did not belong to him, but to God. And then he delivered that interpretation with a clarity and a confidence that could only come from a man who had spent years developing an unshakable relationship with the source of his gift in the quietest and most difficult of circumstances. And this person who arrived at the throne room with the legal status of a slave, and he said something that altered the trajectory of not just Joseph's life, but the lives of an entire generation of people who had not yet been born. Can we find anyone else in whom is the Spirit of God? That question is the one that heaven is building the answer to in you right now, in the pit, in the prison, in the silence, in every season of difficulty and delay and forgotten promise and unjust suffering. Heaven is building in you the kind of person that causes the most powerful rooms you will ever enter to ask that question when you walk in. Can we find anyone else? Is there anyone else who carries what this person carries? Is there anyone else in whom the Spirit of God rests? With this quality and this depth and this unbroken consistency that has somehow survived everything that should have broken it. The book of Proverbs, chapter 22, verse 29, says, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." That is a promise embedded in a principle. The skill that God is building in you through the suffering, the excellence that is being forged in you through the endurance, the quality of character that is emerging from the long, patient, faithful navigation of seasons that were never supposed to produce anything good. All of it is preparation for rooms that you have not yet entered, rooms that are already being prepared for you, rooms where the question that Pharaoh asked will be asked again in a different language by different people in different circumstances, but with the same essential meaning. Is there anyone else? Because there is something about this person that exceeds what we expected. There is something here that we did not train for, and cannot manufacture, and cannot find anywhere else. Pharaoh gave Joseph his signet ring. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the second chariot, and people called out before him, "Bow the knee." And Joseph, the boy who was stripped of his coat, the young man who was thrown into a pit, the servant who was falsely accused and unjustly imprisoned, the prisoner who was forgotten by the one person he had asked to remember him, that Joseph rode through the streets of Egypt as the second most powerful man in the world, not because his circumstances had gradually improved, but because heaven had moved, suddenly, completely, in a way that no human strategy could have engineered and no human obstacle could have prevented. And the restoration that is coming for you is of that same quality. It will not be a modest improvement. It will not be a partial recovery of what was lost. It will be the kind of reversal that silences every witness who watched you suffer and doubted that the suffering had any purpose. It will be the kind of elevation that makes the years in the pit and the prison not just bearable in retrospect, but essential. Not just endurable in memory, but revelatory. Because when you are standing in what heaven has prepared for you, when you are wearing what God has been weaving for you through every season of loss and delay and quiet, faithful endurance, you will understand with a clarity that no explanation could have given you in the middle of the waiting, that every single day of the silence was necessary. Every single day was building something that the palace required you to carry before you could carry the palace itself. Your reversal is coming, not as a distant theological comfort, but as a present, approaching, already in motion reality. Heaven has already moved. You are simply living in the interval between the movement and the manifestation. And that interval, no matter how long it has already been, is not infinite. It has an end. And the end, when it arrives, will arrive quickly. There are moments in the life of a chosen one when the thing that has been coming finally arrives at the door. Not as a rumor, not as a distant possibility that requires a certain squinting of the spiritual eyes to perceive, but as a tangible, undeniable, standing right in front of you reality that demands a response. And the response it demands is not complicated. It is not a theological dissertation, or a carefully constructed plan, or a perfectly worded prayer that covers every contingency. The response it demands is simply this: step forward, open the door, receive what heaven has been carrying toward you through every season of pit and prison and silence and sudden reversal. Because all of it, every single layer of what you have endured and survived and refused to let destroy you, has been building toward this, toward the threshold you are standing on right now, toward the door that is open in front of you in this season in a way that it has never been open before. Joseph stood in the throne room of Egypt and watched his brothers bow before him without recognizing who he was. Think about the weight of that moment. These were the men who had stripped him of his coat. These were the men who had thrown him into the pit and sat down to eat while he was calling out from below. These were the men who had sold him for 20 pieces of silver to a passing caravan and then gone home to their father with a blood-soaked coat and a lie that broke an old man's heart for years. And now they were bowing, not as an act of humiliation that Joseph had engineered for his own satisfaction, but as the organic, inevitable fulfillment of a dream that God had placed inside a 17-year-old boy in a field in Canaan, and that no amount of betrayal or bondage or unjust suffering had been able to cancel. The dream came true, not in the way Joseph would have designed it if he had been given the choice, not through a path that any reasonable person would have chosen if they had seen it laid out in advance. But it came true. Every detail of it came true. The sheaves bowed, the stars bowed. The people who had been most convinced that the dream was delusional became the living proof of its accuracy. And Joseph, standing in the fullness of what God had always intended for him, did not respond with revenge. He did not use the power he had been given to settle the scores that he had every human right to settle. He wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptian heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Because what he was experiencing in that moment was not the satisfaction of vindication. It was the overwhelming, wordless recognition that God had been faithful, that every promise had been kept, that not a single word that heaven had spoken over his life had fallen to the ground, unfulfilled. And that is where you are heading. Not toward revenge on the people who placed you in your pit. Not toward the cold comfort of watching those who doubted you be proven wrong. You are heading toward the overwhelming, wordless recognition that God has been faithful, that every promise spoken over your life has been kept, that every dream, every whisper of calling, every moment of inexplicable conviction that you were made for something more than what your circumstances suggested. Every single one of those was accurate. And the day is coming, sooner than the silence has been suggesting, when you will stand in the fullness of what was always yours, and the only response available to you will be tears, not of sorrow, not of relief that the suffering is finally over, but of the deepest, most uncontainable gratitude that comes from standing inside a faithfulness so complete that it defies every argument the darkness ever made against it. You are not at the beginning of your story. You are not even in the middle of it, though the middle is where it has felt like you have been living for longer than seems reasonable. You are at the threshold. You are standing at the place where everything that has been building is about to become everything that was promised. And the threshold is a sacred place. It is the place where the chosen one pauses for just a moment, not out of hesitation or doubt, but out of the kind of holy awareness that recognizes that what is about to happen is significant enough to be fully present for, to be fully awake for, to receive with every part of yourself open and attentive and willing. The enemy knows you are at the threshold. And that is why the opposition in this season, if you have been experiencing it, feels different from the opposition of earlier seasons. Earlier opposition was designed to destroy you before you reached this point. The opposition at the threshold is of a different character. It is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to freeze you. It is trying to make you stop one step short of the door. It is trying to convince you that what is on the other side is not as real as what you can currently see and touch and measure. It is trying to fill the threshold with enough noise and enough fear and enough reasonable sounding doubt that you stand still at the very moment when heaven is saying, take the next step. Do not freeze at the threshold. The next step is the step that changes everything. Not because you are finally worthy of what is on the other side. You were always worthy in the sense that matters most, which is that God chose you for it before you ever had the opportunity to earn or lose worthiness in any human accounting. But the next step is the step that aligns your physical movement with what heaven has already established in the spiritual. It is the step that brings the invisible into the visible. It is the step that Joseph took when he stood before Pharaoh and opened his mouth and let the gift flow without holding back any portion of it for self-protection. That step changed everything. Your next step will change everything too. The book of Isaiah chapter 43 verse 19 says, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Do you perceive it?" That question is not rhetorical. It is an invitation to look more carefully at what is already moving in your life, because the new thing that God is doing rarely announces itself with fanfare in the early stages. It springs up, it emerges, it begins in a way that is easy to miss. If your eyes are still trained on the wilderness, rather than on the stream that is beginning to form inside it, look for the stream. Look for the small, unexpected, seemingly unrelated developments in your life that feel different from what came before. Those are not coincidences. Those are the first visible signs of a new thing that has already been in motion in the invisible realm for longer than you know. Right now, in this moment, type the words "I receive it" in the comments below, not as a performance, not as a response to a prompt, but as a declaration spoken from the threshold of your greatest season into the spiritual atmosphere of this moment. I receive it. 4 words that carry the weight of everything you have survived and everything you are stepping toward. 4 words that tell heaven you are awake, you are aware, you are present at the door, and you are ready to walk through it into everything that was written about you before the foundation of the world. I receive it. Type it now and mean it with everything you are. You are not at the beginning of your story anymore. You are at the threshold, and the threshold is not a place of uncertainty. It is a place of arrival. Everything Joseph carried through the pit, through the prison, through the silence, through the forgotten promise, arrived with him at the moment he stood before Pharaoh. Nothing was lost. Nothing was wasted. Not a single day of suffering had failed to deposit something into the man he needed to be for the moment that was waiting for him. And the same accounting is true of your life. Every day you carried the dream when the dream had no visible form. Every morning you chose faithfulness when faithfulness felt like foolishness. Every night you held on when letting go would have been so much easier. All of it arrived with you here. All of it is standing at this threshold with you right now. And so in this moment, as you stand at the edge of the season that has been coming since before you were born, I want you to do one thing. Type the words "My time is now" in the comments below. Not as a wish, not as a hope, as a declaration, as the words of a chosen one who has survived the pit and endured the prison and outlasted the silence and is now standing exactly where heaven always intended them to stand. My time is now. Let those words be the sound of your yes to everything God has written over your life. Let them be the flag you plant in the ground of this moment. Let them be the declaration that the waiting is complete and the chosen one is ready, and the door that heaven has opened will not be left unopened. My time is now. Type it, mean it, and watch what moves. There is a completion that only God can author. Not the kind of completion that comes from human effort finally reaching its limit and collapsing into an outcome that resembles what was originally hoped for. Not the kind of completion that arrives after enough strategy and enough network and enough grinding persistence that eventually gives way under the pressure of your determination. The completion that God authors is of an entirely different quality. It is the kind of completion that makes every person who witnesses it go quiet. Not because they are unimpressed, but because they are standing in the presence of something that exceeds the vocabulary of impression. Something that reaches past the categories of success and achievement and breakthrough and touches a register that the human spirit recognizes immediately, even when the human mind cannot fully articulate what it is recognizing. It is the register of fulfillment, of a thing being exactly what it was always meant to be, of a life arriving at the shape that was drawn for it before the first breath was taken. And when you encounter that quality of completion, whether in your own life or in the life of someone whose story has been given to the ages as a testimony, The only honest response is worship. Joseph saw his father again. After years that should have been impossible to survive, after a journey from the fields of Canaan to the pit, to the slave quarters, to the prison, to the palace that no novelist would have dared to construct, because it would have strained the credibility of even the most generous reader. Joseph saw his father again. Jacob, the old man who had wept for his son as though he were dead, who had refused to be comforted because the grief was too large and too final to be argued with, who had carried the weight of a loss that was built on a lie for years, without knowing that the son he mourned was alive and breathing, and standing in the authority of the second most powerful position in the known world. That Jacob was brought to Egypt, and when Joseph saw him coming, the scripture records that he fell on his father's neck and wept on his neck a good while. A good while. That phrase contains multitudes. It is the weeping of a man who has held himself together through circumstances that would have broken most people long before they reached the end. It is the weeping of someone who loved deeply, lost suddenly, endured patiently, and is now receiving back what was taken in a form more complete and more whole than what was lost. It is the weeping of a chosen one who has arrived at the place where restoration is not just a theological concept, but a physical, tangible, standing right in front of you reality. Jacob was alive. The family was together. The dream was fulfilled. And the suffering, every layer of it, every dimension of it, every day of it, had served its purpose and was now being transformed in the light of completion into something that looked less like damage and more like the necessary path of a story that could not have been told any other way. And this is the truth that heaven is speaking over your life in this moment, in this section of this message, with a clarity and a weight that I want you to receive all the way to the foundation of who you are. Everything that was taken from you is coming back, not as a vague spiritual promise that floats above the specifics of your actual losses and refuses to engage with the real texture of what you have endured, but as a concrete particular. This applies to your specific situation word from the God who has been watching every detail of your story with the attention of someone who not only cares about the outcome, but has been actively involved in the navigation of every chapter that has brought you to this point. The relationships that were severed, the opportunities that were stolen, the seasons of flourishing that were cut short by circumstances you did not choose and could not control, the version of yourself that you lost somewhere in the middle of the suffering and have been trying to find your way back to ever since. It is all coming back. Not in the identical form it originally took, because you are not the identical person you originally were, and what God restores always fits the person you have become, rather than the person you were when the loss occurred. But it is coming back, in full, with interest that only heaven knows how to calculate. Joseph did not just survive Egypt. He thrived in Egypt in a way that made the survival of an entire region possible. The famine that Pharaoh had dreamed about and that Joseph had interpreted came exactly as foretold, and it was severe, and it covered every surrounding land, and people came from everywhere to buy grain because Egypt alone had prepared. And Egypt had prepared because a chosen one who had been faithful in the pit, faithful in the prison, faithful in the silence, had been placed in a position of authority at exactly the right moment to steward the abundance, sustain a generous darken through their most desperate season. Your elevation is never only about you. The palace that God is preparing to place you in is not a private reward for private endurance. It is a platform from which the anointing that was forged in your suffering will flow outward to cover people who are in their own pit right now, people who are in their own prison right now, people who are carrying their own dreams through their own silence, and who need to see someone who looks like them standing in the fullness of what God promised, as living proof that the promise is real and the God who made it is faithful. Your story is not finished. Your story is approaching its most important chapter. And the most important chapter of a chosen one's story is never the chapter of suffering, as significant as that chapter is. It is the chapter of restoration. It is the chapter where everything that was taken is returned, and everything that was broken is made whole. And everyone who witnessed the loss gets to witness the recovery and understand in a way that no sermon could have communicated, folly, that the God who allows the pit is the same God who authors the palace, and that the distance between the two is not a measure of his absence, but of the magnitude of what he was building in the interval. The book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 25 says, "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten." That verse was spoken to a people who had watched everything be consumed, who had surveyed the landscape of their loss and found nothing left standing that resembled what had been there before. And into that landscape of total consumption, God spoke a word that defied every observable evidence. "I will restore," not partially, not symbolically, not in a way that requires significant theological interpretation to qualify as restoration. The years, the actual years, the time that felt wasted, and the seasons that felt stolen, and the chapters that felt like they were written by the wrong hand for the wrong story. I will restore them. That word is alive in this moment. It is moving through this message, looking for the chosen ones who are willing to receive it not as a comfort, but as a covenant. Not as a feeling, but as a fact. Not as something that might happen if the conditions are right, but as something that is already in motion in the invisible realm, already being assembled in the spiritual atmosphere of your life, already taking the shape of the restoration that has your name on it, and your history written into it, and your specific losses cataloged within it, with a care and a precision that only the God who has been watching your entire story from before its beginning could have maintained. Joseph lived to see his sons and his grandsons. He lived to see 4 generations of the family that had been torn apart by jealousy and betrayal become a people of such size and significance that they would eventually carry the promises of God into a land of their own. He was not just restored, he was multiplied. He was not just healed. He was made fruitful in ways that extended far beyond his own lifetime and his own story into the lives of people who would carry the inheritance of what he had, endured and overcome into futures he could not have imagined from the bottom of a pit in a field in Canaan. That is the crown that was always yours, not a symbol of status, not a marker of achievement, but the full, generational, overflowing, beyond what you asked or imagined, completion of a life that was chosen before it began and sustained through it, that tried to end it and is now arriving at the fullness that was written for it before the foundation of the world. You survived long enough. The crown was always yours, and what God places on the head of a chosen one who has endured no hand of man or force of darkness has the authority to remove. You have traveled a long way in this message, not just through the words, not just through the story of a young dreamer who was thrown into a pit by his own brothers and carried a coat stripped from his back and a dream still burning in his chest through slavery and false accusation and forgotten promises and years of silence before standing in the fullness of everything heaven had always written for him. You have traveled through your own story, because what has been moving through this message was never only about Joseph, it was always about you, the chosen one who found this message at exactly the right moment. the one who has been carrying something that the people around them could not always see or celebrate or make space for. The one who has endured more than most people around them will ever know, and who has endured it not because they are superhuman, but because the God who placed the calling inside them has been the source of a sustaining grace that has quietly, consistently, without announcement or applause, kept them standing when every observable circumstance was arguing for collapse. You are still standing. After everything that has come against you, after every season that tried to convince you, the dream was dead and the calling was a misunderstanding, and the God who chose you had quietly chosen someone else, you are still here, still breathing, still reaching, still carrying the flame that was placed inside you before you had any say in the matter, and that has refused to go out no matter how many winds have been sent against it. That is not your strength alone. That is grace. That is the unearned, undeserved, inexhaustible supply of divine sustaining power that flows from a God who does not choose carelessly and does not abandon what he has chosen, and does not change his mind about the people he marked before the world was formed. And as this message moves toward its completion, as these final words are being spoken over your life, I want to do something that feels necessary and right, and true to everything that has been moving through this space from the beginning. I want to pray over you, not as a formality, not as a religious gesture that signals the end of a broadcast, but as a genuine act of intercession on behalf of every chosen one who has received what has been spoken here, and who is moving forward from this moment into the season that heaven has been preparing for them. So, if you are willing, wherever you are right now, whatever room you are in, whether you are sitting or standing or lying down or driving or walking, I invite you to simply be still for a moment. Open your hands if you can. Let your posture reflect what your spirit is doing, and receive this prayer as the words that heaven has been waiting to speak over you through this moment. Father, I come before you on behalf of every chosen one who has received this message today. You know their name. You know their story. You know every pit they have been thrown into, and every prison they have endured, and every silent season they have navigated without a map, and without a guarantee, and with nothing but the ember of a dream and the quiet, stubborn conviction that you had not forgotten them. And I ask you now, in this moment, to confirm what has been spoken. Let every word that was true find its landing place in the spirit of the one receiving it. Let every promise that was spoken be received not as inspiration, but as covenant. Let the restoration that you have been building in the invisible realm begin to emerge into the visible with a speed and a completeness that silences every voice that ever said it was too late, too damaged, too far gone for your grace to reach. I ask you to heal what has been broken in them, not just the circumstances, but the places inside them where the suffering left marks that they have been quietly carrying. The places where trust was damaged, the places where hope grew thin, the places where the waiting was so long that something inside them learned to expect disappointment as a form of self-protection. Touch those places, heal those places, restore to them the wholeness that was theirs before the world got hold of them and tried to convince them that what they carried was too large, too costly, too inconvenient for the people around them to accommodate. Let the dreams that have gone quiet begin to speak again. Let the callings that have been deferred begin to stir with a new urgency and a new clarity. Let the doors that have been closed begin to open, not because the chosen one has finally done enough to deserve it, but because your faithfulness is not contingent on their performance, and your promises are not retracted by their seasons of weakness. You chose them, you called them, You have sustained them through everything that was supposed to end them. And now, Father, let them see it. Let them live it. Let them stand in the fullness of everything you wrote for them before the foundation of the world. And let the overflow of what you pour into them flood into the lives of everyone around them who is still in their own pit waiting for someone to look over the edge and say, I know this place, and I know the way out. Cover them with your peace in this season, not the peace that requires favorable circumstances to exist, the peace that passes understanding, the peace that held Joseph in the prison when the cupbearer forgot him, the peace that sustains a chosen one through the silence between the promise and the fulfillment. Let that peace be the atmosphere they carry into every room they enter from this day forward. Let it be the first thing people notice when they are near. Let it be the evidence that something has settled in them that the world did not give, and therefore the world cannot take away. And let this not be the last time they position themselves to receive what you are speaking over the chosen ones of this generation. Keep bringing them back. Keep drawing them to spaces where the frequency of heaven is being released in language they can receive, and truth they can carry, and community they can belong to, without having to explain or justify or diminish the magnitude of what you placed inside them. In your name and for your glory, the story continues. Amen. If this prayer landed somewhere real in you, if something shifted as those words moved through this space, then let that shift be the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of something. The message is ending, but the movement is not. The chosen ones of this generation are waking up, not in isolation but in community, not in silence, but in the growing recognition that what they carry is real, and what God has promised is faithful, and what is coming is worth every day of what they have already survived. If this message has fed you, if it has reached you in a place that needed to be reached, share it with someone who is still in their pit and has not yet heard that the pit is not their ending. Like it as an act of agreement with what has been spoken. Subscribe so that what is being released in this space continues to find you in the seasons ahead, because there is more, and the more is for you, and you deserve to receive it without having to search for it. And if you feel led to support what is being built here, the link to do that is in the description and in the pinned comment below. Every act of support, every expression of generosity toward what God is doing through this space is seen and honored and multiplied in the economy of a kingdom that operates by different mathematics than the world is accustomed to. You are a chosen one. You were chosen before you were born. You have been sustained through everything that tried to end you. And the best chapter of your story, the chapter that will make everything that came before it make sense, is the chapter you are stepping into right now. Go forward. Go boldly. Go as someone who knows that the God who authored the story of Joseph, from the pit to the palace, is the same God who has been authoring your story from the very beginning, and who has never, not for a single moment, lost the pen. The crown was always yours. Now wear it.